Welcome to Moveable Dough. This is Steve Danielson. I'm a composer, conductor, and music educator. On this podcast, I talk with other composers and discover how they began their journey into composition. Join me each week as we explore their lives, their musical journeys, and of course, their music. To learn more about this podcast and access a complete archive of episodes, including the series of shorter segments called Moveable Snippets, visit my website at sdcompose.com/movabledough. Hey, this is Steve. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Moveable Dough. My guest today is Dr. Brett Stewart. Brett is co-founder, composer-in-residence, and conductor of the Millennial Choirs and Orchestras, or MCO as it's often called. He has composed and arranged nearly 150 works for the organization, including the full-length oratorio Messiah in America and the full-length patriotic work To Be American. Brett received a bachelor's degree in piano performance from Brigham Young University, a master's degree in choral conducting from California State University, and a doctorate degree in choral conducting with cognate studies in composition from the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music. Brett Stewart, welcome to Moveable Dough.
Thank you, Steve. It's good to be here.
So I'll come back to MCO in a moment because I do want to talk about that, but I wanted to start a bit further back. So you are currently living in Texas, but I know you didn't actually grow up there. Where are you from originally?
You want to know originally, or just
originally?
I was actually born in Idaho Falls, Idaho.
Idaho Falls. And then what was sort of your journey? Where did places you landed?
Kind of, we had a stint 4 years or so in Arizona, Chandler, Arizona, as a kid, back to Idaho Falls as a kid also. And then where we landed when I was about 8 years old was Huntington Beach, California. That's where my mom was from. And we moved in with her parents when I was about 8 years old. So that's where I say that I was raised, is Huntington Beach, because that was until I graduated from high school. That was where I lived, and actually went back there. That's where we started MCO, was in Orange County, California. So I went back there and was there for another 7 years raising my kids.
Oh,
well, I was
cool.
there off and on between schooling too. So we spent a lot of time in California.
I moved away from Huntington Beach when I was about 6. So
okay,
just missed each other.
That's right.
So when did you start actually making music? Were you playing piano from the womb?
Exactly. Yeah. I mostly singing from the womb. So my dad and mom are both musical. And my dad didn't do it as a career, but as a pastime. He wrote songs. He was actually, he played piano growing up, as did my mom. My dad also played violin. My mom played clarinet. So it was kind of just the thing. By the time we were old enough to even sing or carry a tune, we were harmonizing and singing as kids, singing in church and school talent shows and singing around the piano, that sort of thing. And then we had piano lessons with my mom and eventually with other piano teachers.
So I know your brother is musical because I know your brother, but what about other siblings? Did you?
Everyone. Yeah, my oldest sister, my brother, and myself all majored in piano. So we were all, competitive pianists, and the other two play, and that also grew up taking piano lessons and singing in the choirs at school and at church, and so we all do it. Yeah, it was requisite. Nice. It was requisite in our home to take piano lessons. It was not a choice.
And you do the same thing with your own kids as well?
I don't. Oh. Much to my mother's dismay, they've had piano lessons off and on. The oldest three took piano lessons from the teacher that Brandon and my older sister took from growing up. Very competitive and intense piano teacher and piano lessons. And then we moved to Texas, and so that ended, and we just didn't strike that back up. But I mean, my kids can play some hymns, those kinds of things, but I did not. MCO sort of became the musical outlet in our family because that's my job and that's what I do. So that was our big, once a week trek an hour or whatever, however long it is, to the rehearsal and spend the afternoon. And that was their thing. Other than that, my kids have followed more in their mother's passion of sports. My
Oh,
wife's an athlete, so I did not marry a musician per se. She sings lovely, but that's not her thing. So she's super supportive of what I do, but my kids all play soccer. My boys played football for high school. I mean, everything I couldn't do. So, yeah, they've done that, and I've
that's awesome.
supported it.
All right. So going back to your high school experience, outside of your classical music training, what sort of music were you listening to when you were in high school?
Oh, to admit these things. To be honest with you, I did, because I was in choir in high school. I did do a lot of listening to choral stuff, but a lot of orchestral. I mean, if we're outside of classical, I'll get to in a minute, but I did listen to a lot of classical. I had caught that bug as a young teen and I was ordering those cassette tapes. Remember when you could order the cassette tapes from whatever company and you'd send in the little stamp and and choose the what you wanted and it would come in the mail?
Yeah.
And I had some money from jobs and piano students I had. And so I would order those and eventually compact discs, and I would just listen and listen and listen. So I loved piano concertos and symphonic works and all sorts of things. And then I was getting choir in high school. And then beyond that, I did a lot of listening to the stuff that my dad and mom listened to when I was growing up. My dad, of course, it was in the 80s when I was a kid. So there was a lot of, and my mom, I mean, it was just a lot of, REO Speedwagon and George Michael, and just imagine all the 80s artists. And then or back further, Boston, the 70s artists. And then I did, as the 90s came, I was always interested in the current music. So through the 80s and 90s, it was Depeche Mode and New Order and Oingo Boingo and Danny Elfman and just all of those, Red Hot Chili Peppers, you name it. I had the radio on. I always had music. So I was very well rounded. I enjoyed all that type of music. The only type of music that I could never really get into was hip hop and rap. That was,
Mm,
other than that, I could cover pretty much any genre and
that's
be
awesome.
happy. Yeah.
So do you see any influence from that music in what you're writing now?
Probably, like, not overtly or
Hmm.
purposely, but probably rhythmically some things. And that tends to creep in. It's just like we grew up and lived in an age where, well, even before us, music genres just exploded. It was every possibility. And so I'm sure that that's all, as I compose, I know there's things in my memory bank, or in just my experience bank, if you will, that you draw from. But I don't go, oh yes, I loved that this did. There was one thing that Brandon and I worked on together. Uh, Amazing Grace. We arranged an Amazing Grace together, and I remember I did the choral, and then he came back with the orchestral, and we got laughing about one of the things he did in the orchestra. And I literally said to him, "This sounds like it's straight off of a New Order, a song from New Order." And he goes, "Oh, totally." And it was, so there's a piece of one of my songs that you would probably never notice from the recording, but on A Mighty Fortress near the end. And I did the rhythmic version that actually comes from what Martin Luther, we think, would have originally done. But of course, I modernized it. But there's a piece of it that we got laughing about that sounded like, Annie Lennox, the Eurythmics type of a thing. And we just, so yes, there is definitely stuff that creeps in, but it's not purposeful.
That's nice.
So
So I first met you and your brother Brandon when we were in the BYU concert choir under the direction of Rosin Hall. And I have to admit, I was a bit cowed and awed by your piano abilities and musicianship, something I aspired to as a music major. You were majoring in piano performance, so what led you to pursue a career in choral music?
I figured that I was going to do that clear back in high school. I only did piano because there's no choral major.
Uh-huh.
There's music ed, and that didn't interest me. I don't even know why. It just didn't. I think because I had the piano skills, I just thought I'll just do this. But I also had heard that that's what other I mean, the two directors at the time that I entered BYU were Ron Staley and Mac Wilberg, and both were piano majors. And so I thought, well, if they did that, then, and I knew of others that had done that course, and I thought maybe I should do it. But I did schedule an appointment my freshman year. It was Mac Wilberg's last year at BYU. I scheduled an appointment with him. I was singing in the concert choir with him, and I went in and just asked him. I just said, I want confirmation that I'm on the right path. I thought I was going to be a college choir director. So I said, I want to do, teach college and be a choral professor at a university someday. And I said, is this the right course? And he confirmed, yes, absolutely. Stay in piano. That's a great base for a lot of things. And I listened. I say fortunately, but sometimes I felt it was unfortunate because it's not easy to be a piano performance major. It's a lonely life.
Yeah, a lot of time in
So,
the practice room.
yeah, in a basement, in a dark basement. Yeah.
Right.
So, but anyway, that was kind of why I did that, and just feeling it was a good base, and it ended up being an excellent base for composition too. So, yeah.
Awesome. So let's move to talking about MCO, which has
Mhm.
been the defining ensemble of your career. You and Brandon founded this together, but I want to know why. How did the conversation come about that led to the formation of the Millennial Choirs and Orchestras?
Well, as I said, I was in a doctorate program at the Cincinnati Conservatory, and so I was just headed toward being a college professor. And to be honest with you, I had an immense respect for the professors that I studied with, there, Stephen Coker and Earl Rivers. But I remember just kind of watching. We had our fourth child about a year into my doctorate program in Cincinnati, and I figured I would have more kids. I love kids. I've always loved kids. I wanted like 10 kids. That didn't end up happening, but it's pretty close. But it was we just loved them, and so I thought I'm going to have a lot of kids. And I want to be able to support this family, but I also want to be able to be a family man and have a lot of family time and have that kind of flexibility. And I just watched these professors throughout my schooling really not only married to the job, but also just the time commitment and just everything about. Now, this is how stupid I am. Little did I know that MCO would end up being the same kind of a mental and time commitment, but just in a different way. But it was the process that led me to start thinking, is this what I really want to do? And of course, I had wanted to do this since I was a junior in high school. My wife and I dated in high school. So she was with this, like, she's with me this entire journey. And now I'm coming to her saying, in the middle of a doctorate program, I don't know that I want to do this. she's going, okay, so let's figure this out. So it just ended up honestly being a matter of really fervent prayer. And there was a particular night where I had very particular inspiration that I was supposed to start this thing that I started. And back then, I mean, I have some chicken scratch of what it was when I woke up, like what just happened and what just came to me and what am I supposed to be doing. But I literally, we called Brandon probably the next day, and I said, I've had this idea, and I think it's what I'm supposed to do, and I can't do it alone, and I want to know if you'll do it with me. Now, Brandon was at Juilliard, and he was getting his master's in piano performance, and he was doing also choral cognate studies there because he was interested in that as well. But I don't think he ever considered choral would be his career. But as I described what I wanted to do, and he really didn't hesitate. It was kind of like, yeah, it's a go. I just have to talk to my wife, but yeah, it's a go. I'd love to do this. And Brandon and I had done lots of duo piano recitals and done, as at BYU, we just worked together a lot.
Yeah.
And so we knew we could work together. We knew that I think I always figured that the Lord sent Brett and Brandon Stewart down as a package team. It deep in my heart, I just knew that. It just was just a thing. And it was, he always wanted to do stuff with me, and I always wanted to do stuff with him. And so it came to make a career out of it. It was let's do this. And other things we had thought about or dabbled in or wondered about, and they didn't materialize. And so this was something that we just felt right about from the get-go. And so we did it. Yeah.
Now, I should note the plurality in the name Millennial Choirs and Orchestras. So
Right.
not only do you have choirs for very young children all the way up to adults, but you have locales of MCO spread throughout the United States, the most recent
Right.
addition in Kansas City. So why the decision to create so many ensembles, and where do you see MCO going in the future?
Yeah, it didn't start that way. Back to that story of how it started, it was Orange County, California, because that's where our family was. That's where all of our friends were. That's where we grew up. And so it was never, honestly, never even a thought in my mind that it would grow beyond that. We were going to go and make a difference in the hometown where we lived or had grown up, and where we had these people we loved and adored. And then pretty quickly, once it started, and we realized what it was and what it did for people, and kind of the fire that it ignited. It started to get people in other communities started to get word and ask for it, and that's when the idea started to go, well, maybe we need to have this in other communities. And then that just sort of blew up to the 7 current locales. And yeah, I mean, it's we continue to wonder how we can keep growing, because just it's always the scramble of, okay, now we need more help, and just employees, and just running the organization and everything is just what every small business goes through. But yet at the same time, it just keeps happening. Something happens where, I mean, Kansas City was the most unique one. They just started a campaign on Facebook, a bunch of like moms and maybe some dads, I don't know, that were just like, we want this here, and we're not going to leave you alone until you bring it here. So it was that kind of a thing. And so when that interest came up, then, how could we ignore it? And then, in Idaho, Boise, for instance, that all started because I had a friend I had gone to high school and college with, and roomed with in college, and sang in a quartet with, and he had a job at the College of Idaho, and he lived there in Boise, and we said, hey, Boise would be a great place to have this, and there's a ready conductor who's talented just sitting there waiting. And so we hired him. Now he's off at BYU now, but that was the reason. So every locale kind of had a different reason for starting. And that just keeps happening. And our board of directors wants us to be able to open them up in more places, and also people of stature, and I guess you could say in different places that have influenced and advised us, are also saying the same thing. This needs to be in more places. So we're in that growth mode right now, which is great.
That's
It's
awesome.
a great blessing, and it's also super stressful. So
Could you tell our listeners, where are those 7 locales that you have right now?
So we started in California, and then we opened one in Maricopa County, or East Valley, Arizona. So kind of greater Phoenix area, Gilbert. And then we moved to Dallas, Texas next. And at the same time, we opened up Utah. It was in the Utah Valley area. And then after that was Boise. After Boise was Austin, Texas. And we began to expand more into the Davis County area of Utah as well at the same time as Austin. But that's still one Utah locale. And then Kansas City. Now, there are 2 in Texas. And so, we say that there's 7 locales. But there's also 7 states, because I count Kansas and Missouri with Kansas City. So we say that we got a twofer we got a twofer for Kansas City, right? Because so there are 7 locales, also 7 states, even though there's 2 in one locale, there's also 2 states in another locale. So if that made any sense at all.
Sure.
So that's where we are right now.
That's awesome. Well, something that you and I have in common is that we both have 7 children. So
Yeah.
how do you manage the balance of family life, composing, conducting, etc.?
I don't. I don't manage that very well. It's like I said, the fact that I was able to, in fact, my wife has said oftentimes, I would have, for her, she'll say, I would have never been able to have this many kids if you weren't flexible, and she's saying it as in a place of gratitude that there's this flexibility. But when it rains, it pours. So when it's busy season, and when it's crunch time for composing, or for concerts, or starting up, whatever it is, whatever we're in, whether it's a tour, whether it's starting up a new locale, like this last semester was pretty, if you had looked at my list of travel, we'll open up I travel almost exclusively on Southwest, except to Boise, because it's horrible to Boise. This is a plug for American Airlines from Dallas to Boise. But if you looked at my apps for flights, it was ridiculous. It went on, you had to scroll several times through all of the flights. It just happened to be that kind of a semester. And Mindy picks up those pieces brilliantly. And so we just work as a team. It just works. And my wife's super high functioning. I think she's more high functioning than me.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It just works. Yeah.
And now your oldest daughter about to be married. Congratulations.
Yeah, my oldest daughter, and we have a son dating. They're both they've both served missions for our church and are back. And yeah, so they're growing up, and we're gonna just probably be adding more to this family. It's gonna be great.
Well, congratulations. So
I'm
who
going to
would
tell
you?
all of these kids that they have one of 7 places they can live.
Oh,
And that's kind of where it ends. And you get 7 choices here.
that's right. Well, if
I
you
got
open up
to my
MCO in other
grandkids.
places, they'll have other options.
Okay, fine.
So, who would you consider to be some of your major influences in the way you work, and the influences, and what influences from them do you see in what you do?
Okay, are we talking in any way, artistically,
Art,
organizationally, computationally?
whatever influences you see.
I have to say that one of my first biggest influencers would have been Mac Wilberg. I'm going to say as after high school, I had an unbelievable high school teacher, and I had an unbelievable high school a choral teacher, and an unbelievable high school piano teacher who were unbelievable. So mentors, just in general, I was blessed with. These people are the most intense, oozing with musicality people that I have ever met in my life, still to this day, and that's clear back from my childhood.
Mhm.
And so that passion for music and intensity and perfection and all those types of things was already starting there. But once I got to college, and even a little bit before, Mac Wilberg, just compositionally, I loved what he did. So I wrote a whole my master's thesis was on Mac Wilberg and Evan Stevens. Evan Stevens was a tabernacle choir director back in the turn of the century, 18 to 1900s. And I sort of juxtaposed him with Mac Wilberg as a turn of the century conductor from the 1900s to the
Mm.
20s. So it was like these guys were they were movers and shakers. They were brilliant. They were changing the way people thought about whatever realm they were in. And so I've always loved that. I've always loved people who think big and do big things and make a big mark. And so those were huge. Rosalind Hall, my gosh, like I have learned so much from her, and that was meant to be at that time in my life. She's been a huge supporter, and I just, again, oozing with musicality, demand, perfection, all of it. And so it's very clear when people know who our mentors are, they go, well, that's why Brett and Brandon are the way that they are. But yeah, as far as just compositionally, probably Tchaikovsky's my favorite composer of all time. I love romantic melodies. I love the whole everything that started to happen from Beethoven on in that period. But I always joke that Brahms came up with the most beautiful melodies, and it stopped like 2 minutes too soon. Like he would start a melody and you'd go, "No, keep going," and he doesn't. And Tchaikovsky took it and went like almost too long sometimes,
Right.
where it was like, "Oh, I got everything I wanted, and now." And so
Like
I
end this
just
cadence already.
Yes, 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 right. And so I just love that. I love that you just get everything that you want. And from that, I mean, there's a whole bunch in between, but John Williams, Brandon and I both draw a lot from John Williams. I think that when it's all said and done, he's going to be known as the greatest composer of the 1900s and of the 20 and 21st centuries. That the credit in the classical world, it's starting to come, but and there's people that have delved into his compositions and looked at it from every angle, but there's still this kind of nose in the air attitude of, well, that's movie score
That's
composing,
yeah.
that's for movie, and it's that kind of a thing. But I'm telling you, if Verdi and the rest of them were scoring the entertainment of the 19th century, obviously, and there's a list of them, but John Williams et al. Are composing the entertainment of the 20th century, and there's nothing wrong with that. It just happened to be movies instead of opera, or
Right.
whatever. But absolutely, Bernstein's another one that's one of my just I connect with those composers. So yeah, those are them. Those are my
Awesome.
favorites. Yeah.
All right, I got one more question for you before we take a quick break.
Okay.
So you have what I assume is your favorite job that you could have. So what was your least favorite job you've ever had?
Oh, least favorite job. I actually don't have a least favorite job.
Oh, well, that's nice.
I've actually thought through this before, as I've told my kids the different jobs I had. I had a lot of jobs. through teenage years and early marriage and everything. I even did temp jobs with secretarial work, and I loved it. I loved filing papers because my brain, I'm certainly undiagnosed ADHD. I just too many things going on. But my brain, to have a little task to do and go, okay, this goes here and this goes here, totally fine for me. I had no problem. I could totally be a postal worker. Like that would be work. And I also I love having that kind of focused job to do, but I also love people. So throw me in a job with people and I could totally do, like the Office show, could totally do it. I would have a
Nice.
blast. Like I don't have a job I haven't liked. Even I worked at Taco Bell for 2 summers, right before, as my last 2 summers of my high school, and I absolutely loved it. Started to learn. I just learned so much and loved the people, and that was Taco Bell. My wife would come through the drive-through on her tandem bike, because I worked the drive-through, and ring her bell and just tease me, and I'm like, I love that job, no problem. I thought I'd hate it, but I ended up loving it.
Fabulous.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, after a quick break, we'll come back and listen to some of Brett's compositions. Welcome back. This is Steve Danielson. I'm talking today with Dr. Brett Stewart. So this could probably go without saying, but all the pieces we'll listen to today are performed by the Millennial Choirs and Orchestras. So the first piece we're going to listen to is the New Colossus from To Be American. I have to say, this actually creates a really nice bookend for the Movable Do series so far. So this is episode 99, right before our big 100th episode spectacular. And in episode 1, I talked to Sandra Choi and talked about his new Colossus. So now we get to talk about your new Colossus. And I want to talk about this whole project specifically about the new Colossus. Tell me about To Be American.
So To Be American was meant to be kind of a full-length patriotic. It's not considered like a major work because although there's some connective material between some of the pieces on that album, it could all also be separates. And so what it really was just a program, a concert program, and an album that was this concept of kind of cyclical and connective material from one thing to the next. And New Colossus kind of sits as a, not a centerpiece, but as kind of a standalone. A lot of them are arrangements. That one's an original composition. And it had to be there. We loved that. I mean, we were kind of going through the history of America, and that perfectly told the story of immigration.
Right.
Everybody knows that piece of poetry. And so it just had to be there. And at that point in time, Brandon had not started composing for MCO yet. He had dabbled and done a few things, but really hadn't done much. So you'll notice all the albums from To Be American and previous they're all mine, actually. I don't think Brandon had a single one on there. And so it was I had no choice. It was going to be me, and New Colossus needed to be composed. And so, Brett, do it. Yeah, that was how it happened. So yeah.
Was there anything in particular you were looking for in that piece? Specific style, specific musicality that you were looking for to convey the message?
MCO is an interesting and also not interesting audience base. I always like to say that we are gathering probably about 80 to 90% of our concert goers would normally not step foot into concert halls like that and see a performance like that. Most of them aren't going to the symphony with their kids or even themselves. But what most people do relate to is Broadway and movie score. And so musical theater, I should say. So musical theater type works and Broadway scores, and movie scores is still something that almost everybody relates to. And so when I set out to compose the melody of "Give me you're tired, you're poor," which is the words that are repeated and kind of it's kind of the standard bearer phrase of that poem, I just thought, I want this to be a palatable melody. I want it to be something that you would hear on the stage of Broadway, or so that definitely happened. And then I get a little bit more artistic as it goes along, and I text paint a little, but definitely that "Give me your tired, your poor" melody needed to be simple and singable and relatable.
Awesome. All right. Well, we are now going to listen to the New Colossus from To Be American.
the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea, where sunset gates shall stand, a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame
All right, our second piece today, Precious Savior, Dear Redeemer. So this was actually among one of the pieces I conducted in my first season with the Ensign Symphony and Chorus in Seattle when I started working with the ensemble back in 2018. So could you tell us about writing this and about how your faith in God plays an important role in your work?
Absolutely. This piece, I was getting my doctorate in Cincinnati. And so it was pre-MCO. And we were singing Precious Savior, Dear Redeemer to the music that's found, at least in the hymn book in my church. And so, which is precious Savior, dear Redeemer, thy sweet message now impart. And I remember hearing it and hearing the meter and the tune, and to no offense to whoever wrote it, who's not alive anymore. So, I can't offend many right now. I just didn't like it. I remember singing it going, this music doesn't fit the words. It doesn't fit the beauty and the sacredness of the text. And there were things that were happening spiritually in my life at the time to where each verse kind of patterned something I had been going through. And so it was very clear that the text spoke to me. And so that was kind of one of the first times that I thought, wow, some of these old hymns, the music just doesn't match. And we all know how that happened. Oftentimes, I don't know about, I'd have to remember about that one, but oftentimes they were throwing musical tunes at text just because the meter fit. And so that one and Rock of Ages both, I just thought this doesn't work. That these old tunes don't work for this, for me at least. And so I just composed something new. And the Precious Savior has a Suogan type of feel to it. And I loved that folk tune. And so I just sort of wanted to create something like that. And it really, as once I started, that's one of those, some things you labor over for a long time. Precious Savior melody just came instantly. It was already there in my head for some, maybe from the pre-existence. I don't know. It was just there and I did it and it seemed to fit better for me. So.
Yeah, I know a lot of your compositions focus around faith and around God. So sort of why do you go that direction with your compositions?
I feel, first of all, we oftentimes compose for the venue, or compose for the job. In this case, still do a lot of serving in the church, leading choirs at church, those types of things. And so what ended up happening is I would just compose for whatever I was conducting or whatever I was doing. But and so and same in my job. In that sense, it was kind of for the job. But I've also realized throughout my life, as I think more and more about it, it's what I love. It's what speaks to me. It's what's, like I mentioned before, that melody was already in me. It's what's already in me.
Mm-hmm.
I have a very, very, very strong belief in God and in my purpose on the earth and our purpose as humans on the earth and where we came from and why we're here and where we're going. I've firm convictions of all of that. And I just believe that music, as one of my church leaders said at one point in time, music is part of the language of the gods. And I think it's just been in us since before we came to earth, and it's here when we're on the earth, and we have an expectation to use it. So I do have lots of other loves, and I do compose other types of music, popular music, on the side. Hardly anybody knows about it. But what I know I'm supposed to be doing with the bulk of my career and with my pastime is to just this music of God, just expressing my faith through the music that I compose and listen to.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're going to listen to Precious Savior, Dear Redeemer.
Sweet
All right, our third piece today, Jesus Naciera, Riu Riu Chiu. So I haven't mentioned this yet on the program, but I'm actually part of the Idaho chorus of MCO. And this was one of the pieces that we performed on our most recent concert. So when you're arranging a pre-existing song like this, how do you start? Do you map out where you want the piece to go?
Um, yeah, I do. Like especially with that one. The first thing I do when I go to compose or arrange is I research. So I researched all about Ryu Ryu Chiu, found out what the text means because nobody gets the text. Nobody even understands what Ryu Ryu Chiu is. To this day, I don't think anybody really knows from my research. But I do that first and I find out what the origin is. That one was an old Spanish villancico, which is just like a Christmas carol, basically. And so basically, once I did that, I start to go into my like I talked about that bank before of ideas that are just already there, and I start to sit down and do concepts. Well, I kind of want a little interlude here, and I want this here. That one ended up being like a conglomeration of the Count of Monte Cristo and Mask of Zorro and a couple of other, movies with Spanish themes and or that kind of sounding music and with the castanets and everything because again I wanted to relate to that modern movie going audience
Yeah.
while at the same time going here's this super super old like early Renaissance song that none of you know and or maybe have heard a modern version of it or maybe sang it in choir in high school or something but most people didn't and just kind of bring it to the 21st century. And so that was my way of doing it, was to throw in some of those movie score elements. So, and I admit that if you were to listen to those movie scores I just told you, you will hear direct ripoffs, or we call them artistically
Right.
quotations. So, yeah.
I have been guilty of that myself in the
Yeah.
past.
Every composer has done it, and it's honestly the way to go because it
Yeah.
also we do that. I have no shame in doing it because first of all, every composer did it, but second of all, when we do that, it just automatically connects audience to something nostalgic, something that's in them, something they've heard before. If you ever listen to Polar Express album, Alan Silvestri, it's the kind of album where you listen to it and go, I've heard these songs since I was a child, these Christmas songs, and yet they're newly composed. You didn't hear them since you were a child, but
Yeah.
the elements and the way he does it and the way he quotes and draws from previous materials, it just makes you feel like you've heard it since you were born. And it's
Yeah.
brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. I love when my students listen to one of my new compositions, like, what is this? I've heard it before. Like, no, you
No,
really haven't, but thank you.
that's
All right.
good
Well, we're gonna
composing.
listen.
Yeah.
We're gonna listen here to Jesus Naciera, Riu Riu Chiu. right, our fourth and final piece today, and the Holy One of Israel must reign, from Messiah in America. So many of our listeners may not be familiar with the story that you're telling in this oratorio. Could you tell us briefly what event you're writing about and why you decided to write it?
So as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we obviously have the Bible, but we also have the Book of Mormon, the hotly contested Book of Mormon. And it's a work that I believe in, as I do the Bible. And, Handel and others have written just hundreds and hundreds of works from Bible text. And my brother came to me and asked me to write to a Book of Mormon text. In fact, he specifically said, I think it's time to have music composed or an oratorio or a presentation of this crowning event of the Book of Mormon, which is that Christ came to the Americas and visited and ministered to and taught the people in the ancient inhabitants of the Americas. And this would have occurred shortly after his resurrection, in Palestine. And so it's this resurrected Savior coming to visit. And it's in the Book of Mormon, there's a lot of material that discusses this. And so we tell the story more than going into the teachings. I say in a kind of an explanation of the work that it would take another full-length oratorio to even go into the teachings, which mirror the Sermon on the Mount and other teachings from the Bible. Of course, he taught the same Christian message to the people he visited. But so this more just tells the account of kind of the degradation and declination of the people, their wickedness, and then the coming of Christ and the way the people responded when he came, and just, that kind of a thing, until the point which he left them and ascended into heaven. That's how the oratorio ends.
Yeah. What do you find the most difficult part about writing a full-length major work like this?
That it's a lot of music. The most difficult thing is that in order to tell the story, it has to be a lot. Mine's an hour and a half, and here I am. Handel whipped these things out in weeks and months, right, when he wrote his oratorios. But we're lazier today, maybe, I don't know, or more distracted. And so it just was it's a lot to compose. It's a lot to put down on paper, so to speak, or, music software or whatever it is. And it just gets mind boggling with all the other things. I wrote it in about 2 months. And there were concepts going in my head before that, but when I sat down to do it, but at the same time, you're running an organization, and you're running rehearsals, and you're raising a family, and you're serving at church, and you're doing all these things. And so it's just having the time to do it. I often joked that I wanted to be sent to one of those, compounds that they would send composers to, that just leave me alone for 6 months. That doesn't happen. That's not a reality in my life.
Right.
So,
okay, well, we are going to listen to "And the Holy One of Israel Must Reign" from Messiah in America. Well, Brett, what are you working on now that you can tell us about?
Right now, I am working on, well, what can I tell you about?
Yeah.
Let me think. Um, right now, I'm actually working on two works for our upcoming semester, and they're both original compositions, similar to New Colossus, that we heard earlier. One is The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote the poem about the famous event where Paul Revere rode through the night. And I think it's called Paul Revere's Ride or something, the original, but the famous phrase is the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. And so I'm writing that because we're doing a bit of a patriotic element to our spring program. And I'm also writing the Concord Hymn. The Concord Hymn is that famous hymn that talks about, that has the word, the shot heard around the world. That phrase that we all hear, that's where that comes from. And that was written it was actually written when they erected the monument that celebrated those militiamen and that shot heard around the world, the beginning of the Revolutionary War. And so it was written years later, but it was sung to an old hymn tune that never stuck. And no one, from what we have, researched, no one has ever really written music to that. So I'm writing music to the Concord Hymn, the shot heard around the world.
Well, I look forward to performing it since I get to.
Yeah. And then there's long-term projects I have too, but I won't even go into all that.
So, all right.
Soon to be known.
So if my listeners want to learn more about you and your music, where is the best place to find you online?
Millennial.org. It's just easy as that. Millennial.org I have no personal websites or wiki pages or whatever. It's just, there's a Wikipedia article, but it's meager. So I would just go to millennial.org to hear about millennial choirs and orchestras. There's music. You can see videos, music. You can get a link to Millennial Music Publishing, which is where they can find music that's published. But you can source it all from millennial.org.
Very cool. I encourage our listeners to go check that out. Well, hey, listeners out there, we are coming up on episode 100 of Moveable Dough. On Tuesday, January 16th, we are celebrating 100 episodes with a bigger, bolder, and jam-packed episode that'll knock your socks off. We'll have appearances from former guests, we'll revisit some favorite moments from past episodes, and we'll reveal which episode is number one according to listeners. If you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe to Moveable Dough and then mark your calendars, Moveable Doers, because episode 100 drops on Tuesday, January 16th. Don't just listen, keep the music moving. Well, Brett, it has been a joy today. Thank you so much for joining me on Moveable Dough.
Thank you, Steve. It was a pleasure.
My guest today was composer Dr. Brett Stewart. If you have a recommendation for a future guest or an idea for the show, please email me at moveabledough@gmail.com. This is Steve Danielson. Keep the music moving.